What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Maye today on Monday, November 11th, 11/11 today, the day after the majority of the Week 10 games have happened yesterday on Sunday. Some more great games. I feel like I say that every week, but truly, the last couple weeks have been very entertaining, and this one had a couple good ones. We're going to talk about, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs game and the Broncos game there with that last-second blocked field goal. Also, Sunday Night Football had a lot to talk about between the Lions and how close they were to losing that game, so we're going to discuss that and some more games. We're going to preview Monday Night Football as well on today's show, so make sure to stick around. And also, not just watching, but if you guys want to get involved with this show on any topic that we have on store today, you can go ahead and do that in an easy way by using the Super Chat feature that we have available to you guys now. Just by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box, you can now send in your Super Chat and get involved with the show, whether it be a question, comment, opinion you'd like to share. Please don't hesitate to do so. We always want to hear what you guys have to say, and your input and insight always makes the show a lot better in our opinion, so please don't hesitate to do that. It's nice and easy for you guys. Use the Super Chat button and click the $ at the bottom of the chat box. Send in your Super Chat and make sure to get involved with the show. But now, after that's now done and out of the way, we can go straight into talking about the games, right? And specifically, I thought one of the highlights of yesterday afternoon, the 1 o'clock window really, was this Kansas City Chiefs game and the Broncos game. A divisional game, the first time these two teams have met this season. And going into this game, I picked the Chiefs to win, and they ended up winning, right? But I thought it would be more of a blowout. Honestly, I underestimated what Denver's defense could do. After I saw the Baltimore Ravens game, I thought, yeah, they're okay, but it comes to a point where it all just kind of gets discombobulated, and it all just kind of falls apart like it did against Baltimore. But after the Baltimore game, it's definitely feeling a bit, you're feeling sick if you're a Broncos fan and just how they lost yesterday, right? Coming out after that tough defeat to Baltimore and being in this game really like to the last second. You thought you had to win, and then, of course, Kansas City block what would have been a game-winning field goal with 1 second left on the clock to win 16-14. And the Chiefs stay undefeated at 9-0, while the Denver Broncos fall to 500 now at 5-5. And it honestly, if we're talking just strictly about the Broncos, I don't think it gets much tougher in terms of a road trip for any team that they're going to have to face this season. But considering where the Broncos are in this journey with Bo Nix and, getting used to this new team, I don't think it gets tougher than this road trip because they played the Ravens, 2 weeks ago now, and they played the Kansas City Chiefs this past week, both times on the road, and now they lost both of them, so they fall to 5-5. But a tale of two different games. The Ravens really had their way with the Broncos after a certain time, and then the Chiefs, to kind of echo more of a sentiment about how maybe the Chiefs aren't looking the same, maybe they lost a step here or there. It always feels like that's the discussion each and every week, but they find ways to win, and that's what good teams do. And ironically, that's how we're going to start this entire show, talking about the Chiefs in this segment, and then a little bit later talking about the Lions. Good teams find ways to win each and every week, and I've never been a huge fan about how you win. Good, pretty, ugly wins to win. And, good teams don't really bother too much about whether or not they throw for 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, or hold the other teams to, 10, 15 points. That's great. But at the end of the day, you're measured by those results, and the Chiefs are very well aware of that and very good at that as well. And speaking more about the Chiefs, on that blocked field goal, it was really interesting how head coach Andy Reid clarified after the game that that was something that they had, taking notice of and that they wanted to take advantage of as the game went on. And we mentioned on that blocked field goal, Leo Chenal, George Karlaftis, and Mike Dana were really the ones that were involved on that left side of the Broncos, field goal unit, that left side of it, the right side if you're looking at it from the Chiefs' point of view. But yeah, really, Karlaftis, Chanel, and Mike Dana were all on that side. And a couple plays before, they had been getting a lot of penetration through that side. And I'm assuming that's what head coach Andy Reid was talking about, how just that left side of the Broncos field goal unit was not really holding up. They had gotten some pretty clean looks, but obviously they didn't block anyone, of course, until the most important kick of the game. But it's those sort of things, the small details. Actually noticing something like that, it's never something us casual fans would ever even notice. A block, a kick, an extra point, a field goal, it's all pretty similar looking, so nobody pays attention to those small details, and that made the difference, right? Andy Reid said that it was something that they wanted to take advantage of, so they ended up doing so, and it won them the game. They remained perfect at 9-0, and this is their best start in franchise history, tied for the best start in franchise history, actually, and now it extends their undefeated streak, 9-0 this year, but it goes back to 15-0 going back to last year, which is now the longest since Green Bay won 19 in a row back in 2010 and 2011. So, they're, it seems like they're making history each and every week. So it's nothing new, but it's still pretty cool, in my opinion, to see, what they're doing each and every week, which is pretty neat. But in terms of the performances, the Broncos stayed mainly in this game because of Bo Nix. I think this was his most impressive game that I've definitely seen him play because of the opposition on the road and being in a position to win and pretty much doing everything he could to win this game. It was, in my opinion, the best game I've seen him play. He had 215 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was 22 of 30. Very efficient day for him. The passing game also, along with Bo Nix, Courtland Sutton had a nice afternoon, 6 receptions, 70 yards and a touchdown. Devon Vele had 4 receptions, 39 yards, and a touchdown. And the running game wasn't too bad either, but mainly it was a defensive game. Obviously, only 30 points combined between both of these teams. Patrick Mahomes, not a bad game. 266 yards, a touchdown, and 28 of 42. Kareem Hunt didn't have his usual Kareem Hunt sort of impact. He only had 35 rushing yards, and Kareem Hunt actually had 7 receptions for 65 yards, so more involved in the passing game. Kelsey had a day, 8 receptions, 64 yards, and a touchdown. Hopkins, a much quieter day as well, with 4 receptions for only 56 yards. And again, both defenses were showing out. That's something both of these teams definitely bring to the table each and every week, right? If the Broncos offense isn't there, you can guarantee that their defense is going to show up. And same thing with the Chiefs. Their defense has kept them in a lot of games, or not kept them in a lot of games, but really shut the door and guaranteed them their wins as well. So looking at how the game sort of rolled out here, it was actually Denver that led at halftime 14-10, a game where the defense, like I said, was standing out because of the scoreline, and Denver was 1 for 2 in the red zone, and Kansas City was only 1 for 4. So these defenses, once they even got into the red zone, defending that short area, they were effective at doing so. And Kansas City scored the only points in the second half, really, with those 2 field goals. They were down 14-10 at halftime, then they scored those 2 field goals, and obviously they were up 16-14, right? But Bo Nix, really what put the icing on the cake for me on this great game by him was that last drive that was easily his best of his rookie year. He put together a 10-play, 44-yard drive. He converted 4 third-down conversions throughout this drive and put the Denver Broncos in a position to kick that 35-yard field goal, which, it sounds a lot easier than it actually is, right? In that environment, knowing that all the pressure's on you, knowing that you need a field goal, it's a lot for a rookie, and I think Bo Nix has shown a lot of his maturity. Sean Payton clearly trusts him, so they're working very well together. But of course, we know Kansas City, it's crazy. Like they get all these things, and people think it's lucky. But of course, if there was any team that you would bet on to block a field goal like that and win the game, it would be the Chiefs. It's just how it always feels like the cookie crumbles with them. And not only that, speaking about these wins and people now calling it lucky and everything like that, it follows a recent trend of winning their last 8 games when trailing in the second half. And, this game, because of the blocked field goal, it seems lucky. But if you're trailing over the last 8 games in the second half and you win all those games, it comes to a point, probably after like the 4th or 5th game, where it's not luck anymore. These guys are so comfortable. They never blink in these tough moments. When you got a guy like Patrick, of course, it's a lot easier. But a lot of credit to that defense, too. They are oftentimes in positions where they need to step up, create a turnover, get off the field and things like that. That's why, it usually it feels like the opposition is the one that crumbles, right? Because of that defense. But in this game, I felt even more assured that the Broncos were going to win this game because they were executing on those third downs, and Bo Nix was making some big throws when it mattered. But, it ultimately didn't go down that way. Now, I will say that Patrick missed a wide-open Travis Kelce on that field goal where they made it 16-14. So if they make that, the Broncos need a touchdown. So maybe it's not so dramatic, but, it turned out like this. And it feels harsh for Denver because it feels like they did everything right. They didn't really harm themselves with turnovers or anything like that. Their defense played great, but they fall to 5-5, and it's crushing, of course, right? When you can get a huge win like this, especially as a rookie quarterback. But big picture, thinking about now into the later month of November, December, and talking about the playoffs, they still have their future in their hand. They're at 5-5, but they're the last seed in the playoffs. They hold that last wild card spot right now, and it's still on their hands, right? Of course, if they could win as many games as possible. And I know they play the Bengals, which is probably their biggest threat to take that spot. So, it's not like they have to depend on anybody else. It's still pretty much down to them. So it's hard to just say, just wipe off this defeat. But, it is what they have to do now. There's going to be a lot better games ahead for them to go out and win. But I think this is just encouraging for them as well. To be in this game with the Chiefs, they always give them problems. If anything, just take the moral victory and say, we hung with these guys, and learn from it, I guess, going forward. But that wasn't the only, great, dramatic, late field goal type of game that we had on Sunday Night Football. It was another one where the Texans almost beat the Detroit Lions, but they did execute their late game field goal, and they won 26-23. We're going to discuss that, how truly bad the Lions played, but it doesn't really matter when we're talking about these great teams. That conversation is coming up right after the break. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Jumping back into the action now on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss the closest of games that we had up until now, the Sunday Night Football game between the Lions and the Houston Texans. A really entertaining game all in all between Detroit and Houston, in which the Lions completed a 16-point comeback to win 26-23 after Jake Bates hit a game-winning field goal at the end. The Lions win their 7th straight game now. They go to 8-1, and Houston lose back-to-back games for the first time this year, obviously, but also it's the first time they've lost back-to-back games since the first 2 games at the beginning of last year. So it's it's pretty noteworthy, obviously, because of how the trajectory of the Houston Texans has been to not lose back-to-back games in this, real rebuild with a new quarterback and things like that. It shows how good they've been, but also how foreign this situation feels for what really should still be like a rebuilding, ascending team. But I think it's taken for granted now how the Texans have just turned this over in just a question about a month, and now they're considered a top team in the AFC, where normally, more often than not, teams like this are still ascending and things like that. So more of a credit to them, but that's still pretty remarkable. And Detroit is now 8-1 for the first time since 1954, and it's the fifth win in a row for them on the road as well. So Dan Campbell, much like he echoed the sentiment against the Packers, they feel like they can beat anybody and they can win in all elements, in all scenarios, away, at home, outside, inside. They're really making their point with how they're playing, especially in a game like this, which was as close to a loss. You really have to try to play this bad. And, it feels like to still win this game, it almost feels like at this point, like a loss is inevitable for the Detroit Lions. And it was as bad, as close as I've seen them lose a game in all this time I've seen the Lions play, really from where they began ascending and things like that, because Jared Goff threw 5 interceptions in this game. The complete opposite, right, of how everyone's been talking about Jared. The completion percentage, the effectiveness, just how in sync and in rhythm this offense was for him to throw 5 interceptions. Now, of course, all of them weren't like his fault, like he made bad reads. A couple were tipped. There was some miscommunication and whatnot, which seems foreign for this Lions team that just feels like they execute at the highest level. But, for whatever reason, whatever defense the Texans were running, or just from their own mistakes, just on that day specifically, the Lions threw 5 interceptions, and really, it's not a scenario, obviously, where you can still win the game, and I think it's just more of an echo to how great the Lions are, obviously. But really, Goff's 5 interceptions were the most by an NFL player since Jameis Winston in 2019 against the Carolina Panthers. And really, Jared Goff had not even thrown an interception over his last 5 games, and he only had 4 coming into this game. And his career worst, I should say, with interceptions was back in 2018, where he threw 4 against the Chicago Bears when he was still with the Rams. And now he obviously, broke that record, and still, they won the game, which is remarkable. And looking more at Jared Goff, I actually have it up here for you guys just as I go along reading some of these stats and the performances, right? Jared Goff, as you see there, 240 yards, 2 touchdowns. Those 5 interceptions obviously stand out. He wasn't sacked at all in this game. 0 sacks, but still, the 5 interceptions is pretty crazy. 15 of 30, 15% completion percentage. Jahmyr Gibbs contributed with 71 yards rushing. David Montgomery, another 32. So not as dominant as a game as you'd expect from the Lions, but still, they got some contributions from Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta. Both of them scored a touchdown and had at least 60 yards receiving. And then on the other side, the Texans, I didn't think they played bad, but it was one of the first games, or really the only game, where Joe Mixon, I think, was held under, I want to say 60 rushing yards. I'd have to go back and check, but this is definitely his lowest, production rate of all season. The lowest was against the Bears, but he got injured, so I won't really count this one. Excluding that Bears game in week 2, this is the lowest rushing yards that Joe Mixon has recorded against any team. He usually averages around 100 yards, which is crazy, but he only had 46. He did score in this game, but the rushing production wasn't there really. Although, we did get some surprises from some of their young receivers, in particular John Mechie, who had 5 receptions, the most out of anybody, alongside Tank Dell, who also had 5, but John Mechie had 74 receiving yards and a touchdown, and Tank Dell, like I mentioned, 5 receptions, but only 39 yards. Dalton Schultz had 66 yards as well, and yeah, I mean, for the Texans to record 5 interceptions and, again, still lose, that's probably the biggest takeaway, or the biggest, just point of emphasis from this game. Of course, the Lions really are a great team for them to still win this game, but I think also for the Texans to lose this game, especially being without Nico and Stephon Diggs, and to make a big statement win like this, would have been huge for them, but of course, it didn't turn out that way. And now looking at how the game turned out, right, it was very much in the Texans' favor early on, right? Like we were talking about, Houston took the advantage off of the first interception to go up 7-0. Then the score was 10-0 before Detroit scored a touchdown by Sam Laporta to make it 10-7. And Detroit punted and threw 2 more interceptions in the first half after that touchdown, while Houston added a couple more field goals and a touchdown with 12 seconds left in the first half to go up a surprising 23-7 at halftime. And at that point, I'm thinking, it's going to be tough for the Lions to come back because of how good and the level that everyone holds the Texans to, because of the fact that, CJ and all their good players that they still have. They didn't have Will Anderson in this game, and that goes to the 0 sacks, obviously, but still, they're a good team to not give up a 16-point lead. I didn't think that was even possible, but the story completely flipped in the second half. Houston didn't score a single point after halftime. Rather, they threw 2 interceptions, they punted 4 times, and they missed a field goal there, obviously, which is huge, right? Looking back on it now, it would have at least tied the game for them if Kaimi Fairbairn hit that field goal. Detroit get back in the game slowly, despite throwing 2 more interceptions in the second half. But really, how good the Lions are, everybody points to their offense, right? Jared Goff, MVP candidate, the best running back duo potentially. The offensive line is amazing. Ben Johnson, also a great play caller. Amon-Ra St. Brown, underrated receiver. But everyone always forgets their defense, and their defense really kept them in this game by, like I said, taking Joe Mixon away, but also the defensive backs in the secondary played great. In particular, Carlton Davis had a couple interceptions. Terrion Arnold, a rookie for them, starting for them, made a couple big plays. Amik Robertson, also a guy that I have to shout out. And on their defensive line, very, very good still, despite losing Aiden Hutchinson. Ali McNeil, super underrated in the running game. He gets pressure, but he was really the only guy creating that pressure. And still, they have Zadarius Smith still to join this team. He didn't play this week. Dan Campbell opted to give him that rest week because he would have been one of the only players to not have a bye week at all, because of the fact that the Browns didn't have their bye week yet and the Lions already did. So he was going to play 18 straight weeks, but Dan Campbell decided to give him this week off. And also a guy that I can't stop talking about is Brian Branch. Brian Branch, number 32 for the Lions, their safety, is awesome. He's so good at, I think he's only in his second year, and he does everything for them. He'll line up in the slot, at safety, cover tight ends, cover running backs, create turnovers, and he is as much of an impact player for them on that side of the ball as probably Aiden Hutchinson. But I feel like a lot of people don't talk enough about Brian Branch, and he really is, I think, asserting himself a lot more as the season goes on. Alongside Kirby Joseph is a killer for anybody, right? At one point, you try to throw away from Brian Branch just because he's very good in coverage, and then you look at the other safety, Kirby Joseph. You don't want to throw it to him because he leads the NFL in interceptions. So it's a huge help, obviously, for this defense to kind of keep everything in front of them. And once Zadarius Smith joins this group, it's going to look a lot better, obviously. Zadarius Smith, 32 years old, how much you get out of him, I think he's going to be great for them overall, but there are some doubts there. But the way that they're playing on defense is not talked about enough, so I thought I'd mention some of those guys. And yeah, it's a huge win for the Lions overall, but also on the other side for Houston, just my final thoughts on them. I feel like it can't get here soon enough when Nico Collins returns, because again, it's not like they played awful. To score 23 points at halftime, of course you want to do it and play great the entirety of the game, but to go up 23 points at halftime, to run the ball okay enough in the first half, again, to have that lead, it just feels like they still need at least one X factor type of player where teams have to know where he is at all times. You think he's covered, but he's really not, because that's how good he is. They need a player like that. And Tank Dell, I think, is still in a development phase where he is still super young. He still has, he plays great. He makes some good plays as well. CJ has a lot of confidence in him, but I feel like Nico is a little bit further ahead in that regard. Of course, he's older too, and he's played a lot more in terms of just comparing him to Tank Dell. So I thought they still need a guy like that. Stephon was that guy for them, but obviously he's now out for the rest of the year. They need a guy like that, not only, to help CJ out, but also you can't load the box as much with Joe Mixon. If you know you have Nico Collins out there and he's, going off, you're going to have to at least double him or just have a lot of eyes on him, where it should open it up for Joe Mixon as well. And hopefully John Mechie, I was very high on him around the trade deadline because I think he's very good. Hopefully he gets it going a little bit more and kind of steps up with Stephon Diggs out. Him, Tank Dell, once Nico Collins comes back, it should be enough. But this game, of course, they're going to hate that it slipped away from them, but it is a spot where they're not really used to, and it's crazy to say because they're still so young, but, in the AFC South, they should still win that division, and once Nico comes back, once they get a little bit healthier, Will Anderson, of course, coming back, they should just shake this off. They were in this game with the Lions. Of course, the Lions played their worst game, but still, regardless, it is something to not just be completely beat up over. The Texans are going to be good. This is just one of those rough spots in the season. They're going to recover from it, and I'm sure do all right to finish the regular season. And then once the playoffs start, having a guy like CJ, these young guys, they're going to be fine. So, great game overall still. That's what happens when we see two great teams, two legitimate contending teams play at prime time. Ideally, that's what you want to see. And speaking now about two legitimate teams that we saw, not really in prime time, but in the early window, the Steelers took on the Washington Commanders. The Steelers beat the Washington Commanders 28-27 in what was their toughest game so far in 2024. We're going to break that down, discuss everything that we saw in there and what we liked about the Steelers from yesterday's game. So we'll be right back with that discussion. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping right back into the action now, a game that I was glued to the majority of really the afternoon yesterday was this Steelers and this Commanders game that was definitely one of the highlights, I think, going into the early window. Of course, then you have the Chiefs game and everything like that and how good that ended up being, right? And a couple more elsewhere scattered around. But this one was really one I was paying attention to, not just because of my fandom, but obviously it was the first real test for the Steelers and two teams that were first place in their division going into this game, and the Commanders on how good they were doing, Russell Wilson and all the hype around him, how the Steelers offense was really hitting on all cylinders with him as their quarterback. This real test that the Steelers had to face at this point in the season ended in a way that I think most Steelers fans have become accustomed to, and I think just how Mike Tomlin really loves watching these games come down to, one, their defense making plays, making big stops, and getting everyone involved and hyped up and everything like that, but also great quarterback play. We haven't seen that combination truly since Big Ben Roethlisberger obviously retired, and the Steelers haven't had that great defensive performance along with Ben making plays, right? And they really just had to rely on the defensive side of that, right? Where their defense makes big stops, and you're really left wondering with their quarterback situations in the past whether or not they were going to be able to step up in these big moments. But evidently, they have a guy now that they're able to rely upon as well. And I'll speak about that more in just a second. But just in the context of this game, the Steelers won by 1 point, 28-27, to go now to 7-2. Washington loses for the first time in about a month. Now they go to 7-3 and drop to second place in the NFC East after Philadelphia defeated the Cowboys, so it drops them down one spot. And funny enough, the Commanders' last loss overall was to an AFC North team in the Ravens. Also, that one was a close game. And yeah, Commanders have lost. Two of their games have been to AFC North teams, so both evidently pretty good teams overall. So that is something. And this is the first home loss also for the Commanders this year as well. And it's the first, a lot of firsts in this game. This is the first game also that Russell Wilson threw his first interception since he was with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jeremy Chin intercepted him in the third quarter, I believe. And it's the fourth win in a row for the Steelers as well, still in first place after this win. The Ravens continue to win, setting up a huge game next week between the Steelers and the Ravens. And Pittsburgh scored a touchdown in each quarter and held Washington to 0 points in the fourth quarter. So the Steelers went 7-7, and the Commanders, just failed to score in that fourth quarter, which any sort of points would have obviously most likely given them the win. But again, that is something that the Steelers have sort of built a reputation to in the second half, or at least towards the end of the games, where they've done a very good job of just shutting teams down. And their defense over the last couple weeks might have been giving up more points than maybe you're accustomed to. I say that. They've only given up 27. This is the most points that their defense has given up since the Colts game, or actually since the Cowboys game where they gave up 20. But everything else has been less than 20. So maybe not so much on that point, but it is something that is becoming a habit now for the Steelers defense. And overall, from the performances in this game, Russell Wilson didn't have a fantastic game. He was 14 of 28 for 195 yards, and I actually have that up here for you guys to also see. 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. He was sacked 3 times. Jaylen Warren actually led the team in yards. He had 66, while Najee Harris had 53 yards, and he scored the lone rushing touchdown for the Steelers. George Pickens had another impressive game. He had the most receptions on the team with 5, the most yards with 91, and he scored a touchdown. Mike Williams had 1 reception, 32 yards, where he scored what turned out to be the game-winning touchdown. And Pat Freiermuth also contributed with only 17 yards, but a touchdown and 3 receptions. And on the other side, the Commanders didn't play a bad game, honestly. Jaden Daniels had 202 yards, no touchdowns, and no real involvement in the rushing game, which is a huge credit to the Steelers defense. Jaden Daniels was 17 of 34, 50% overall on the day. He was sacked 3 times in that game as well. And no Brian Robinson, which was a huge miss because of how big not only he is individually, but the combination of him and Austin Eckler really is a big point of emphasis for the Commanders on one thing that they've done a lot of improvement on. So him missing was a big hit, but still, the Commanders scored 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 of them to Austin Eckler, 1 of them to Jeremy McNichols, and Terry McLaurin was having a good day against Joey Porter Jr. He had a couple big receptions and a couple nice catches, 5 receptions for 113 yards to lead all receivers. But this game broke down in a very, back and forth game, very entertaining, 100%, between 2 teams that you'd expect to kind of put on this performance, 2 first-place teams in their division. And the Steelers actually led in this game on the road after George Pickens had that crazy touchdown to lead 7-0. Then they tried a fake field goal, and some people don't really like it. Some people think that it's just a way to kind of to do too much in that scenario, but I didn't hate it. He was so wide open. James Pierre was the player that dropped it. he was so wide open because the defender kind of ran into the pile to kind of add an extra rusher to try and block the punt. And I actually like that call because if he catches it, no one's saying anything, and he was wide open. He just dropped it. So, yeah, of course it came back to bite them, and the Commanders capitalized by scoring a touchdown. But in hindsight, you only take hindsight into account when it's so obvious like that. Like, he had nobody around him, and he just dropped it. They were saying how he had practiced that, or they'd practiced that throughout the week. So I didn't hate it, and still the Commanders tied it up 7-7. And from that point on, the Steelers scored again in the second quarter, like we talked about. Pat Freiermuth scoring that one, but Washington really from that point on they cut it to 14-10 before executing a 15-play, 94-yard touchdown drive to then lead at halftime, 17-14 after that touchdown, which was a killer because the Commanders got the ball to start the second half and they scored again. So now the Steelers are down 10 points and the Commanders are in a very good spot, honestly. But luckily for the Steelers, they responded with a touchdown, and it got to a point where the Commanders added another field goal to make it 21-27 when the Steelers were orchestrating a great drive. You know, Jaylen Warren was running the ball very well, but very harshly done there at the end where he fumbled it on the 1-yard line, and the Steelers, discredited a big opportunity where they could have taken that one and maybe scored a touchdown, maybe scored 3 points. It would have made a difference either way in this game, but it wouldn't have been so close, obviously. But still, great play by the Commanders defense to force that turnover and dodge a bullet there. And they end up doing nothing with it, and Pittsburgh get the ball back there once they forced that punt, and that's when Mike Williams scored the touchdown to make it 28-27. And the Commanders still, for a young team, really in their first year of all these new pieces, they were executing a good drive, and it got to fourth down where the controversy popped up, right, where the spot was a little bit dodgy. Some people thought he got a first down. Some people thought it was the right call. I thought it was the right call. But when it's so close like that, in all honesty, in real time, I thought they were going to give him that first down because just like I've seen too many times where it's been like that. So I thought they were just going to give him the first down. But once it got a little bit closer, they started reviewing it. And it's huge. It's huge because of the fact that they called it short of a first down. If they called it a first down and then they reviewed it, I think there wasn't enough evidence to overturn it either way. So the Steelers were pretty fortunate there that they called it short because the evidence wasn't really telling, other than the fact that Zach Ertz's knee was down and DeMonte Casey's hand actually touched him. That was pretty clear, and you could argue that he was still short, but the fact that they called him down first rather than getting the first down, I thought was huge. So the Commanders turned it over. You thought that was almost the end of the game, but the Commanders still had all of their timeouts, I'm pretty sure, and it came down to a fourth down. Ironically enough, like the Steelers defense had, the Commanders defense, all they had to do was presumably stop the Steelers on fourth down, and they were going to get the ball back either way, whether or not the Steelers were bluffing and they just let the time run out, or they actually went for it and the Commanders could have stopped them, and it would have benefited them greatly. But of course, we all know how it ended. The hard count got rookie defensive lineman Jerzon Newton to jump off sides, and the Steelers sideline went crazy. That was the end of the game because the Commanders didn't have any more timeouts, obviously, and the Steelers escaped with a 1-point victory. And overall, the Steelers held Jaden Daniels to 3 carries for 5 yards, the lowest all season for them. So they really made it a point of emphasis to mitigate the rushing game for Jaden Daniels. And what's become a trend with this Steelers defense, like I said before, in the second half, where they come up in big moments, the Steelers now have outscored their opponents 135-55 in the second half. They have a plus 80 scoring margin, which leads the NFL in that category. And it's, again, I want to make sure I emphasize that it's not just this season where all of a sudden their defense is coming up with big stops, they're holding teams in the second half. That's been there, but now I feel like you have a guy like Russell Wilson who can execute in those high pressure moments and have the same level of high execution as this defense, where this defense makes a stop and Russell Wilson knows how great of an opportunity that is, and he understands that, all right, they got the ball back from me, I'm going to go execute. And he's been in those moments, obviously Super Bowls, big game-winning, game-tying drives and things like that, conference championships and whatnot with the Seahawks, playing with a similar style of great defense, great running attack like he had in Seattle. He's been in these moments, so now I think that's what's really, I think, emphasized this relationship with Russ and why he's playing so good is because of how much it resembles the Seahawks days. And maybe the Steelers defense isn't the Legion of Boom, obviously, historically, but it has a similar, sort of blueprint. And I think Russell Wilson now is why this Steelers team is not only executing more in these critical moments, but they've completed the puzzle with Russell Wilson. So that's been extremely pleasant to see because I've seen the Steelers mess up a bunch of those drives just this year with the mishandled snap with Justin Fields against the Colts. That was obviously huge. So having a guy like Russ is obviously massive for them. And with the extremely low turnovers also, this team has really stopped hurting themselves. And again, in this Washington game, there was a lot of penalties by, the corners with holding calls and face masks and things like that didn't help themselves out too much. But on offense mainly, like I said, they're not really hurting themselves where they're taking sacks on second down, or they're missing assignments where someone comes unblocked, or they have those penalties, like I said, that puts them behind the chains. There's not confusion on routes or anything like that. That's where, again, the level of calmness, experience that comes with Russell Wilson has painted this picture of the Steelers and how well they're executing in late game situations. And that's exactly how I think they like to win. All in all, Mike Tomlin, the defensive mind that he is, knowing that he has a great defense and now a quarterback that can execute at this high level, sort of like Big Ben did for them as well a couple years ago. It's the Steelers are feeling as good as anybody, and are they contenders? We're not going to answer that question now, but this was definitely a big win for them. So all in all, we'll leave that topic there. We have a couple more to get to on today's show. One of them, we're going to talk about the Chicago Bears and the Patriots game, and just what we took away from that, mainly from the Chicago Bears and what they need to do going forward. So stick with us. We'll be right back in just a few seconds.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are back now to discuss another game on here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast. After a couple of great games, maybe this game wasn't the most entertaining high-stakes game between the Bears and the New England Patriots, but I think it's still pretty fascinating on what we saw from this game and what we can take from it going forward, because Caleb Williams in this game, he is now 0 for 2 this year when playing against quarterbacks from his draft class. He played Jaden Daniels and, the Hail Mary and things like that for the Bears to lose in that game. And now he plays Drake Maye, the third overall pick, and still he finds himself on the losing end of it. Him and the Chicago Bears obviously losing this game 19-3. The Patriots go to 3-7 now and are actually in third place in the AFC East after the Jets lose yesterday, and Chicago drops to 4-5 and lose their third straight game in a row. Now, offensively, this segment is mainly going to be about the Bears because they only managed 142 total yards on offense. They were 1 for 14 on third down, which is awful, inexplicably bad. To be 1 of 14 is insane. Like, this game might as well have stopped at halftime, if we knew this game was going to be 1 for 14, if the Bears were going to be 1 for 14 on third down, you could have stopped the game at halftime because there was no way they would have won the game being 1 for 14 on third down. That's, of course, where you get the 3 points from, and just the overall bad performance in general from the Bears. And it doesn't get any easier for them, unfortunately, because the next 6 out of their last 8 games are against the NFC North. They have, I guess by that math, all of their games against the NFC North still to play, and the rest of the NFC North is 21-6 at this point. So I can't imagine they're going to be favored in many, if any, of those games. So it's going to be a harsh second half of the year for the Bears, ultimately. And now you look at the struggles on offense and you look at the struggles overall from this team. Not really so much on defense, but the offense, which everybody was talking about at the beginning of the season, including myself, how we thought they did everything perfectly. They got Keenan, they drafted Rome, they had DJ Moore, they brought in DeAndre Swift. That this offense, along with Caleb Williams, was of course going to take some time, but we never imagined it was going to be like this. And now someone has to be held responsible because of the outrage and the just the disappointment from the fan base overall. Someone has to be held accountable, and people are obviously looking at Matt Eberflus. He's now 14 of 29 in, or 14 and 29 in his tenure as the Bears head coach in about 2.5 years that he's been there. With Matt Eberflus, already there has been some doubts, but now he is probably a favorite to be fired this offseason, if not in the next couple weeks, realistically. If after this game they've lost to the Patriots, that can't sit too well with a bunch of fans that made themselves already get their hopes up this year that it was going to be different, but it's been too similar to what we've seen in the past with Mitchell Trubisky and the bad coaching, the bad combination of coaching and play calling, the lack of talent with Trubisky and Justin Fields, and now bringing in more talent, but still the offensive play caller might not be there, the head coach might not be the right guy, and if you do fire him, you're going to continue the cycle, right, with Mitch, with Justin, switching and constantly having the switching coaches and play callers. The lack of stability, it's rendering its head yet again, and it's not something you want to see because Caleb Williams, I still believe, is a generational talent, but you can't hide the fact that they're not helping him very much, if at all, with this team, with the play callers. And now, obviously, offensive coordinator Shane Waldron hasn't escaped criticism as well. Matt Eberflus mentioned after the game how they're going to consider everything, including changing the play calling duties and taking them away from Shane Waldron. He didn't mention it specifically, but he's included in there, obviously. And yeah, I mean, offensively, this game wasn't great for the Bears. Like I mentioned, Caleb only threw for 120 yards. He was 16 of 30. He was sacked 9 times in this game, which it's not all on the offensive line. You might think it is when you're sacked 9 times, but Caleb has something to do with that. DeAndre Swift only had 60 rushing yards. Keenan Allen only 44 receiving yards, 5 receptions. DJ Moore had 3 receptions. He was targeted 6 times. Same thing with Rome Odunze. Just a very sloppy, inefficient day by the Bears, where the Patriots, on the other hand, not impeccable, but they did enough to win this game. I'll get more into the comparison in a little bit, but Drake Maye, he had 184 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Ramondre Stevenson, 74 rushing yards, and the leading receiver was actually Austin Hooper with 64 yards, followed by Demario Davis and Keyshawn Boutte. And it's not like the Patriots are an exciting, Washington Commanders-esque team, right? They're very much a few steps behind the Commanders, to say the least, but they have a better plan than the Chicago Bears. All in all, they at least have a direction of where they're going, and for right now, the Bears don't seem to understand or really know what their short-term future is, going forward just this year, but also who the coach is going to be, the offensive play caller, are they going to retain Keenan Allen, things like that. Not the questions you already want to have just going into the second year with Caleb Williams. So the Patriots much better know that Drake slowly is going to get there. Maybe this season's not going to be great for them, but they have a clear plan of how they want it to go, and they're very much on track, but the Bears are very far from that, evidently. From starting off pretty decently, now have really had a bad taste of reality just set in here over the last couple weeks. And in this game, there's not really much to point out other than the fact that the 5 drives that the Bears had in the first half, only one ended in a field goal, and the rest of them, were just punts. The difference came towards the end of the first half, though, because it was still relatively close, but New England scored a touchdown and had a late field goal to go up 13-3, and then the second half included 7 punts between the both of them and 2 more field goals by New England. And Chicago not only scored only 3 points in the first half, but they scored no points in the second half. So as bad as the first half looked, it was arguably worse in the second half. So the score 19-3 doesn't really reflect how demoralizing this game really was. I'm sure almost all Bears fans must have turned this game off because of how painful it was to watch. And it's disappointing just from the standpoint that Chicago's defense is good. They're a very good defense and a good part of this team, the best part of this team, actually. They've given up 19 points or less in all of their games except 2, against the Colts and against the Cardinals. Those are the only 2 games they've allowed more than 19 points. And we just talked about the Steelers and how they've only allowed around the same thing, only 19 or more points on a few occasions. And the Steelers are 7-2, where the Bears are struggling, obviously. The Steelers have a lot more of a veteran presence, obviously, but the defense for the Chicago Bears team is far from the problem. And we talked about the sacks, right? It was 9 sacks yesterday, but 6 sacks also against the Cardinals, who are not nowhere near like leading the NFL in sacks, but they managed to get to Caleb Williams 6 times, and now the Patriots get to him 9 times is absurd. And I think Caleb being included in the decision making, being indecisive, and I think just at times, like we saw at USC, all those ridiculous plays you see, like running back like 10 yards, 15 yards, and then running forwards again, and then throwing it like 40 yards down the field. It is a hard habit to shake, and you obviously don't want to waste a play, and you credit him for that, right? Not giving up on a play, but sometimes against, grown men playing this game for like, their livelihood and a job, they're not going to let you do that, and you're rather off better throwing the ball away than doing all of that too much. And still, the offensive play calling doesn't help him too much, and I question whether or not he 100% believes in the plays that they're calling, or he feels 100% comfortable in making some of these throws where you see the offense at times and nobody's, like, quite literally no one is open, or at least no one's open at the same time that Caleb drops back, gets into his progression, and is ready to throw the ball. Nobody's really open at times, or they are open, but Caleb misses them, and the whole timing and everything seems to be off with this team. And you can have that to an extent with a rookie, but it's gone too far back where Caleb actually looks like he's getting worse, and that's the last thing you want. And it's a reminder, I think, just overall with this game and what we saw from the Bears, that the coaching, the play calling, the development, all of that is the most important thing. And like we did on this show, and like how everybody did, it's great to bring in those pieces. You need pieces like that, obviously, right? You need good players on a team, but all those pieces, all those tools really don't serve for anything, really, if the coaching, if the guy operating it all doesn't really have an idea of what he's doing. You look at just the comparisons with Drake Maye, like I said, it's not great. Drake May's working with less, arguably, than what Caleb Williams has been given, but he's been given the time to develop. They've had a clear plan of how to get the best out of him, how to enhance the things that he does well. And that's where you see Drake Maye looking a lot more comfortable out there, pretty much working very well within the offense, where Alex Van Pelt, the offensive coordinator for the Patriots, is doing a great job of that, obviously. And you look at Sean Payton, another rookie quarterback with Bo Nix. Arguably, probably working with less than what the Chicago Bears are. Both great defenses. Both of them have that. Courtland Sutton, Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, DJ Moore. Definitely more with what the Bears are working with. But Sean Payton, the play calling, his experience with quarterbacks and getting the best out of them, you see the difference with Bo Nix, who was the last quarterback selected in the first round, and Caleb Williams, who was the first. The difference is night and day, where Bo just went toe-to-toe with the Chiefs, almost won that game, and he made some big-time throws and is really operating and feeling comfortable in that offense, where Caleb, not so much. And, you look at the difference. Alex Van Pelt has a clear plan of what he's doing with Drake Maye. Sean Payton, obviously with all his experience and being a great, revered coach in the NFL. The Bears, no shade to Matt Eberflus. He's great at defense and things like that, but Shane Waldron and Matt Eberflus aren't really doing it justice on the offensive side of the ball, which is really hurting this Bears team. So they were an exciting team. I was really excited to see them in the offseason, but it's all really unraveled in a pretty negative way. But I'm still holding out optimism over them. I'm not saying Caleb's a bust or anything like that. It's too early to say that. But unfortunately, it feels like they're going to have to not restart the whole thing, but, bring in a new coach, offensive play caller, more centered around the offense. And, it's going to take some more time right now for Caleb Williams because he's going to have to learn a whole new offense and things like that. So it's going to take some more time, unfortunately, but I think it's a step that the Bears need to admit now at this point in the year, where the playoffs look like a long shot. All that excitement and optimism has kind of died down, so they're going to have to go back to the drawing board and maybe, I don't know, find like a Ben Johnson or something like that, or a Ben Slowick from the Texans and have him be their head coach. But yeah, I mean, it's been a hard season for the Bears, and hopefully they can get it turned around. But that's all of the action from Sunday. We're going to touch on more of those games tomorrow. And right now we're going to get to our last segment and preview the game on Monday Night Football that is set to start in less than an hour here between the Dolphins and the Los Angeles Rams. We'll be right back with the preview to Monday Night Football after this break. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. Just a quick preview here of Monday Night Football. The game is set to kick off in less than an hour here Eastern Time. And it's going to be a good one, I think, between the Dolphins and the Los Angeles Rams here tonight. Two teams trending in opposite directions, though, over the last month or so, with Miami traveling 6 hours, making that 6-hour flight over to Los Angeles tonight to face the Rams tonight. The Dolphins enter this game at 2-6, but like I said, on a 3-game losing streak, where the Rams are on the opposite side. They're at 4-4 and have a 3-game win streak in their last 3 games. And these two teams don't really play each other too often, but Miami has had the upper hand recently. Miami has won the last 5 meetings between these two teams, and the Rams' last win hasn't been since 2001, since I was born, when they were still the St. Louis Rams. So it's been about like 23 years since the Rams last won one of these games, because they don't play that often. But really, the Dolphins have had the upper hand just in general, head to head. And despite the losing streak, though, this Miami team is pretty interesting just because they played a great game last week against Buffalo that concluded with Tyler Bass obviously hitting that game-winning field goal that won the game for them 30-27. But the Dolphins haven't been playing bad, on offense at least. They haven't played bad against the Cardinals, but they ended up losing that game as well on a late second, field goal. Same story last week. The offense not playing awful by any means, but still, it's that last drive where they just can't hold up, and they've lost 2 games where you look at it differently, and they would be 4-4 as well, just like the Rams. But sometimes that's just how it goes, and it's unfortunate for this Dolphins team because they had a lot of optimism going into this season, right? Mike McDaniel talking about how it was a constant reminder of them not having success in the playoffs recently, how they felt pretty good about this team, but with the injury to Tua, obviously that affected everything. And they sit here 2-6, trying to save their playoff hopes with a win here tonight. But the Rams, on the other side, they've been on the positive side of those close games. Just last week, they won in overtime 26-20 against the Seahawks in Seattle as Matthew Stafford threw that game-winning touchdown pass to DeMarcus Robinson. And they're getting hot at the right time. I've been very high on the Rams recently, and looking at them a bit closer, why I've been so hot on them is because they're getting healthier. They obviously got Puka back, they obviously got Cooper Kupp back, but tonight they're expected to have 2 offensive line starters, Steve Avila and Jonah Jackson, who they got in free agency from the Detroit Lions. Both of those guys are expected to start here tonight. They should have been activated off of the IR for this game, so they should be ready to go in tonight's matchup between these two teams. Looking at it now, just to make sure, yeah, they are off the IR, so they should be starting tonight, which is a great sign for them, alongside with fellow offensive lineman Joe Noteboom. He should be healthy enough to play tonight. After practicing last week, he wasn't able to play